Thank you for tuning in. We're going to teach you today how to make a silicone dampener thing for your Preonic / Planck. This is one that I've already made. This is actually a dud. It is a little bit too thick compared to what I need. This is about 2.5 millimeters. I need it to be closer to 1.5. So we're going to remake it, and today I'm going to show you how to do it with some simple steps. This is inspired by Sweet Serendipity. I will put a link to her YouTube video as well. I am using a Miracle Coup silicone rubber. This is a 2-part silicone molding kit. I'll put a link to this in the description as well. But this is what we're using. We're using a 1-to-1 mixture. Use exactly 40 milliliters, so 20 of one, 20 of the other, in order to make our case. I'm also going to show you some of the tools you're going to need to do this most effectively. So 1, some painter's tape. It doesn't have to be the 3-on blue one, but it always works really well for me. 2, anything you need to put your keyboard back together. You'll also need an Xacto blade and a toothpick. I think that's all you need. Yeah, it looks good. All right, I lied. You also need a Sharpie. So have one of those on hand. It doesn't have to be silver, but this works best for me. To make the mixture, I'm going to use this mug. You could use something disposable if you want, but shout out to Data Sciences Incorp. I don't know where this mug came from, but I have it. Secondly, I would recommend some gloves. Do you need them? I'm not really sure if it's toxic or not, but if it is, it's probably better to die with a good-looking keyboard in your hands. In all seriousness, I like it purely because the stuff does tend to get stuck on your hands and feels a little bit gooey afterwards. So unless you're a big fan of that feeling, I definitely would recommend the rubber gloves. We're going to grab a measuring apparatus. Now, I've already used this one once before, so it does have a little bit of a gooey residue inside of it. Hopefully that doesn't affect anything, but if it does, I will certainly let you know at the end of this video when we see how it turns out. We're going to take part A, the first part, I guess. I mean, if you did part B first, that would be really confusing. We're going to uncap this. For this one in particular, it does have a seal on the top, so I like to remove that as well. And this is where you generally will get your hands very jizzed on. And we're going to measure 20 milliliters, so looks about right. Take 20 milliliters of the first thing. This looks like something I've seen way too many times. We'll add it to our mug. Our mug, is it clean enough? Hopefully. I will also let you know if the mug cleanliness is important or not following this. Probably is, because otherwise I don't think it will set as clear and nicely as the other one. So 20 milliliters of part A. Of course, 20 milliliters of part B. This is a step that I have seen neglected before and will lead to poor results if you do not use the 1-to-1 mixture or ratio. All right, so we'll get that. Now, you might also want to use a plastic or disposable cup. Probably should have put that on the inventory list, but I will certainly do that in the description. And also a mixing apparatus. In this case, I have chosen this plastic spoon. Feel free to use a metal one, but again, I don't think you really want to be drinking this. So we're gonna mix it up. Now, I will supercut this here. One of the things you don't want to slack on, do not take less than 5 minutes to mix this up. Use it to mix this. Otherwise, you will not get a nice, it won't set very quickly is the first thing. It might take a while to set. And 2, you might get bubbles in it. I'm going to pause it here because I'm sure you do not want to see me, stir this for 5 minutes or do a supercut thing with music or whatever. So we'll be back. I actually recommend doing this before doing your 5 minutes of mixing. However, I neglected to do that because reasons. Next up, we're going to want to tape up the holes in our case so that the silicone does not go into the holes and make everything impossible to screw up. I recommend doing this in straight lines because what will happen, and you will see this on the other silicone mold that I've made, anywhere where there's tape, it will leave this kind of rough mark on it. So to at least make it look a little bit prettier, we're going to cut them into even squares. So I've cut a bunch of little squares here. You can make them little or you can make them small. You could cover the entire bottom, whatever you want to do. One of the most expensive keyboarding. Anyway, one of the most important holes to cover up here is going to be the one where the USB Type-C is going to poke out. And we want to make sure that we cover that one entirely so stuff does not leak out here, because then we're going to have a bad time. We're going to have a little bit more of a bump here because of the way that I decided to do it this time. But we are going to push it down as flush as we can here on the corner. And then once that is done, we are going to go up on the side. We want to do that to ensure that we have a tight seal here in the corner. And we're going to leave a little tab up here, and that's going to be to make it a little bit easier to pull out. We're done with that. We've already mixed our mixture for 5 minutes. It looks pretty much the same. So now we're just going to yeet it in here. We're going to pour it starting from the middle, and we're just going to kind of let it flow in there. I know. We're also make sure for all these that you push them nice and flat, especially if they're smaller pieces. You don't want anything seeping through there and making it impossible to thread your screws. So we're just going to layer it on in the middle and kind of go from one edge back to the middle and over. I found that this works pretty well. And then we'll go over into the corners. Well, the reason I like doing this from the middle instead of kind of getting it all around is I find that, especially when we're doing so little, that it may not be thick enough to kind of reach everything if you do it that way. So I like doing it all in the middle, kind of letting it ooze out towards the edges. Try and get as much out of here as we can. We'll spoon again. And we'll try and get the last little bit of it out, because it is important when we're doing this to get every last drop. And also to avoid getting it onto the edges of the case, because it will be a pain to clean up. When I say the edges, the top edges, that is. We really do not want to clean it off of that. Oh, look at that, look at that. Some of it already has set, I suppose. We'll wipe our hand off so we don't get too much on the outside of the case because we took our gloves off. So after we do that, we're literally just going to kind of let it drip down, right? And ensure that it touches every corner. We'll get on this side too. I tend to want it to go more towards the bottom than the top because of that Type-C connection over there. Type-C connection, it needs to be pretty flush with the case. Once we get it all the way up to this wall, and we'll get this corner over here. It looks like we missed our far corner. There we go. So once it's touched all that, we're going to kind of wait for it to settle back down towards the bottom, because we'd rather have the liquid towards the bottom side. And this is not an angled case, so. But we'd rather have our liquid towards the bottom side so that we don't have to worry about the situation where maybe we have just a little too much up by the top side. And what will happen then is you will not be able to put the USB Type-C flush with the case. If you cannot do that, you will not be able to use your silicone. It will end up like this one over here, where we perfected the technique, but it is just a little bit too large. So now, I've heard that you can do this for as little as 1 hour to let it set. We literally are not going to touch it or do anything, but I am going to give it maybe overnight. It depends. If I wake up in the middle of the night, we're going to put it together. But if we don't, we're going to let it sit here for an hour. All right, so I've let this sit overnight. So pretty much what we've left this tab for is to remove the silicone without tearing it, hopefully. So we're going to pull very so slowly. Alrighty. And it looks like it came out pretty well. And we'll take this piece of tape off. Now you'll see here again what I mean about the tape. So on the back side, if you look closely, there's little marks where the tape are. So really the smaller that you can make them, the better I think it looks appearance-wise. But from the bottom side, a little bit less noticeable. And in addition to that, you won't really be able to see it under the PCB anyway. Just to give you an idea of how thick this is, we have our caliper. Make sure it's zeroed. Now we're not going to put too much pressure on it since it is silicone and it is, you know, malleable anyway. So if I close it too tight, it won't really accurately let us know how thick it is, but we will try and get the best idea that we can. You know, roughly 2 millimeters, give or take. Probably a little bit of pressure on it there, but roughly 2 millimeters. But that's about what we were looking for. For the next step here, we're going to remove the silicone liner. And we are going to remove all the little pieces of tape from the bottom of the case, since we no longer need these. Get them all there. And the bottom of our case is looking pretty good. You will notice that there is some of the silicone mixture may get underneath these little pieces of tape and leave a little bit of residue, but you can wipe that away with a paper towel. You can kind of see the little spots there, but nothing too crazy. We're going to put our silicone back in the case. And we're going to put it in and take it out a couple times at this point, but let's get it to sit there a little bit nice. Sometimes it's tricky because it is so perfectly form-fitted to get it to sit properly. All right, so we got it in pretty good here. You might find that it's a little bit of a tight fit. You can always trim the edges to make it fit a little bit better, but we got it pretty much as good as we can. This little corner here is kind of bending a little bit, but I think it'll be fine. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to identify where the holes are in the back of the case for the reset button and all the screws. Pretty much what we're going to do, and it's actually kind of nice because the little bit of tape helps us identify the spots better. We're literally going to pierce through these holes. So we're just going to take a toothpick, we're going to go all the way through. I find it's better to do this from the top than the bottom, as it will pull more of the silicone out and leave an actual hole for the screws that we're going to use to mount the PCB. So we're going to do this for each of the spots. And sometimes you'll notice it will collect some of it on the toothpick, so we'll just wipe it off and put it to the side so it doesn't give us any issues. And we'll do the reset button. Normally it won't go all the way through, or if it does, sometimes it's a bit of a tight fit, but looks like it worked that time. So now we have our holes for mounting the PCB. Next step is to cut out a hole for the USB Type-C. So to do that, again, luckily the silicone is pretty much transparent. So we're going to note where the USB cutout goes, and we're going to take our Sharpie and we're just going to roughly outline it so we know where to cut. Then we're going to pull out one more time, and we're going to cut it with our Xacto knife, so bear with me. It is kind of tricky to get out, and one of the good tips that I have to get it out after it is inside is I like to take kind of a finger over here and try and kind of slowly get the silicone off of the corner. It's a little bit tricky to see here, but once you have a little lip of it rolled in, just use the toothpick and it will make it a lot easier to get it out opposed to using your fingers. And we're going to use our Xacto. And I find it's a little bit easier to do it upside down, but we're just going to roughly trace this. And I like to do the sides first and then go across, if that makes sense. So we will do 1, 2, and then we'll do one across. And sometimes the silicone will move because it is rather stretchy, so. All right, and we have our little cutout now. So we will go back into the case. I might cut this again if I don't get it on the first try, which I probably will not. And also, one of the things you can do is to, again, if you're picky, there is some residue. If you just roll your finger around it, or if you use a paper towel, you'll see it will collect, so you can get it out of the case. I don't think I have an issue with it fitting or anything like that, but if you are, again, picky, you can go ahead and get it out of there. Take our silicone again. And this is, I would say, the hardest part, honestly. But after you have put the holes in, it makes it a little bit easier to guide it and drop it in. And I just like to kind of tuck the corner down. Sometimes it'll bunch a little bit, but it is what it is. All right, so next, let's put the PCB in. Now, you'll know that you've done this a little bit too thick, and I even may have here, if you cannot get this little bump here on the PCB to go down there. So we'll try and do that without forcing it. I think we got the perfect height on it. Looks pretty darn good to me. So next we're going to screw it in. And one of the really cool things about the silicone is it actually makes this a little bit easier in my opinion. I also like to thread the top left corner of the PCB first, if possible, just because that is the most important one in terms of making sure that the Type-C fits. So we're just gonna hand thread the screw here. Now if it doesn't thread straight like this, if it's threading an angle, it means that it is not sitting flat and the silicone is in the way. So we didn't have that issue, so it looks like it'll be okay. We'll get our silicone pieces out of here so they're not making a mess. But we're going to thread that in, and then we're just going to do the rest of them. So at this point we have the PCB screwed into the case, we have the silicone underneath it, and it really does create a very nice seal. As you can see, in some points in the corner, it'll even kind of flow back over onto the top side of the board to offer even better sound dampening. So at this point, I don't recommend using the secure plate method. So in other words, at this point, we're really just going to put our switches into our plate. I have this carbon fiber one that I had custom cut for this. Pretty much we're going to put our switches into the plate. We are going to put them down in here. One of the things that I like about this is that with the loose fitting method, if you do not have silicone under your PCB on the Planck or the Preonic, I noticed that it flexes a lot when you try and put the buttons in, or the switches in. Having the silicone underneath, I think, is only going to make our PCB more secure and prevent it from being damaged as we insert these switches. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're just gonna put the space bar in. And that one went right in. All right, so I think we're okay here. We're gonna plug it in. I'm gonna do a sound test here. I don't have a before and after. It's mainly because I don't feel that sound tests are very accurate for what this does to your keyboard anyway. But just to humor you, I'll do a quick 60-second one over here. Here we go. Alrighty, we'll do a couple tappy taps. Overall, it's pretty consistent in terms of the sound of it, but hopefully this video helps you guys. Hopefully you like the sound of it. I love it. I think it works great, and good luck on your mods.